I gripped my digital tablet tighter as Spencer Bradley leaned forward across the mahogany conference table, cutting me off mid-sentence for the 17th time that afternoon. What Bruce is trying to emphasize, Spencer interjected with practiced, booming authority, is that our market outreach expenses need minor adjustments. But let us table those granular financial details for next week. The executive boardroom hummed with soft murmurs of casual consensus. Not a single person at that table acknowledged what had just transpired. Once again, I had spent 3 grueling weeks refining those fiscal projections, logging 50-hour work weeks, skipping family dinners, and conducting exhaustive database audits to pinpoint the precise capital allocation model that could pull our enterprise out of its tailspin. Yet my carefully vetted conclusions were treated as minor background noise. Beneath my leather-bound portfolio, I drew a crisp 17th tally mark next to Spencer's name. 17 explicit interruptions in 90 minutes. My fellow executive directors sitting across from me had enjoyed completely uninterrupted speaking time throughout the entire session. When our chief executive officer, Harlan Thorne, casually announced that our primary venture capital benefactor, Winston Montgomery, would be joining our next quarterly review via video conference to evaluate an $80 million Series B funding request, a quiet resolve settled over me. That night, sitting in my home office at age 54 after 25 years in corporate restructuring, I thoroughly reviewed federal wiretap regulations under Section 2511, subsection 2, Clause D of Title 18 of the United States Code. The statute clearly affirmed single-party consent legality in our jurisdiction, confirming that recording a conversation to preserve evidence of corporate misconduct or breach of fiduciary standards was entirely lawful. The next morning, I stepped into the executive conference room 20 minutes early. I casually placed my smartphone flat on the polished table, initialized the audio recording application, placed a legal notepad over the display, and calmly waited. What transpired inside that conference room over the next hour altered the trajectory of my entire career. It did not merely bring personal vindication, it exposed how reckless executive hubris can quietly destroy a promising enterprise. Before I detail the full sequence of events, I want to emphasize that what unfolded was not driven by spite. It was about restoring accountability to an institution that had traded operational rigor for superficial swagger. If you have ever poured your intellect into a vital initiative, only to watch louder, less competent voices talk over you and hijack your work, you will understand precisely why every single action I took was necessary. My name is Bruce Vance. I am a senior financial strategist, holding a Master of Science in Quantitative Economics and over 2 decades of hands-on experience rescuing distressed technology firms. In my previous executive tenure, I engineered a comprehensive revenue diversification framework that yielded our investors triple their initial outlay within 24 months. I do not merely calculate operational budgets, I decode structural patterns that others overlook. 6 months prior to that recorded meeting, I had been aggressively recruited to join Apex Vantage Systems, a promising mid-sized enterprise developing high-throughput analytics software for industrial supply chains. While their core software architecture was genuinely innovative, their financial health was a disaster. They were burning through capital reserves at an alarming velocity, repeatedly missing quarterly targets and deferring vital debt obligations. Our chief executive officer, Harlan Thorne, had recruited me with impassioned promises of executive authority and strategic freedom. Your analytical precision is the exact catalyst our executive team lacks, Harlan had insisted during our final recruitment lunch. We want you to completely overhaul our monetization framework, eliminate operational friction, and prepare us for our pivotal funding rounds. I believed him. At 54 years of age, with a reputation built on integrity, I resigned from a stable advisory post to accept the challenge because I recognized the raw commercial potential of Apex Vantage Systems. During my initial 30 days, the professional environment seemed constructive. Executive colleagues appeared receptive during orientation sessions, noted my preliminary observations regarding expense redundancies, and nodded respectfully when I outlined structural vulnerabilities. However, That professional courtesy evaporated the moment I transitioned from abstract advisory memos to concrete operational enforcement. The very first time I presented a comprehensive capital restructuring proposal during a Monday leadership assembly, the pushback took a subtle yet persistent form. Every time I reached a crucial financial pivot point, someone would intervene. Let us circle back to those projections later. We must prioritize immediate sales momentum. That is an interesting theoretical model, Bruce, but perhaps too conservative for our aggressive growth strategy. At first, I subjected my own methodology to rigorous self-examination. Was I being overly dense in my presentation style? Was I failing to project sufficient executive presence? Was I overwhelming the room with complex statistical modeling? I refined my approach. I streamlined my slide presentations, polished my verbal delivery, and highlighted bottom-line profitability metrics. Nothing changed. By my third month on the job, I began systematically documenting every single instance of speaking disruption during executive assemblies. The statistical evidence was indisputable. While my fellow department heads averaged 0 to 2 minor interruptions per presentation, my structured presentations were subjected to double-digit disruptions without exception. The primary culprits were Spencer Bradley, our Vice President of Marketing, Julian Croft, our Chief Technology Officer, and occasionally Harlan Thorne himself. What compounded the frustration was observing Spencer and Julian take fragmented components of my financial models weeks later, repackage them under different terminology during executive briefings, and present them as their own spontaneous concepts. Meanwhile, Apex Vantage systems continued to bleed capital because they were executing only superficial fragments of the holistic strategy I had designed. I attempted to resolve the friction through direct professional dialogue. Following one particularly contentious meeting, I requested a private conversation with Spencer Bradley in his corner office. I noticed that you interrupted my capital allocation breakdown multiple times during this morning's briefing, I said, maintaining a composed, professional tone. I would appreciate the professional courtesy of delivering our financial status completely before we open the floor for general debate. Spencer adjusted his designer cufflinks, offering a condescending smile. Did I interrupt you, Bruce? I certainly did not intend to cut you off. I was simply keeping our agenda moving efficiently. These executive assemblies tend to drag on when we get bogged down in granular accounting details. Yet barely 40 minutes earlier, Spencer had commandeered 15 uninterrupted minutes, showcasing speculative branding concepts that possessed zero measurable connection to our quarterly revenue benchmarks. I tried alternative operational adjustments. I distributed comprehensive briefing binders 24 hours in advance, requested designated presentation blocks on Harlan's calendar, and spoke with amplified vocal authority. The executive dynamic remained utterly resistant to change. The breaking point arrived during our third-quarter fiscal review. After enduring 17 explicit interruptions in 90 minutes, not a single executive in that room had heard my complete diagnostic breakdown. The comprehensive financial strategy I had spent 3 exhaustive weeks constructing was dismissed as unnecessary caution. We were exactly 3 weeks away from our definitive funding conference with Montgomery Capital to secure $80 million in Series B financing. Capital that was essential to keep our payroll operational, and our executive leadership was deliberately blinding themselves to critical fiscal realities. That night, sleep eluded me. Apex Vantage systems possessed remarkable technology, but without a disciplined financial backbone, the enterprise would face involuntary insolvency within 6 months. This was no longer merely a matter of professional frustration or bruised executive pride. It concerned the long-term survival of the enterprise and the financial security of our 67 dedicated employees. That was when I conducted my legal research, verifying that single-party consent, audio recording under federal wiretap statutes and local state laws, provided total legal protection for preserving documentation of managerial misconduct and corporate oversight failures. I did not intend to leak the recording to public channels or trade outlets. I required undeniable, empirical proof an unassailable record of executive behavior to present when I brought these governance failures before Harlan Thorne or our primary board members. The following morning, the atmosphere inside our executive conference room was thick with palpable anxiety. The $80 million investment from Montgomery Capital would either secure our market expansion or, if rejected, plunge Apex Vantage Systems into immediate restructuring. Harlan Thorne adjusted his silk tie compulsively, pacing the perimeter of the room, while Spencer Bradley and Julian Croft nervously reviewed their talking points. When the video link connected and the screen illuminated, the commanding figure of Winston Montgomery appeared. Winston Montgomery was legendary across Silicon Valley and Wall Street alike for his incisive intelligence, razor-sharp fiscal discipline, and absolute zero tolerance for corporate fluff. At 64 years of age, with thick silver hair, tailored executive attire, and sharp gray eyes that seemed to evaluate your character within seconds, Winston commanded immediate authority. His venture capital entity, Montgomery Capital, managed billions in corporate assets and had underwritten some of the most profitable enterprise software buyouts of the past decade. "Let us commence immediately," Winston stated calmly after brief formal introductions. "I have thoroughly reviewed your preliminary pitch decks, but I want a direct, transparent assessment of where your operational metrics stand today." Harlan Thorne launched into his standard corporate overview, highlighting brand vision and market positioning without interruption. Julian Croft followed with a 20-minute technical presentation regarding platform scalability and server infrastructure, speaking completely uninterrupted. Then Harlan gestured toward my end of the table. "And now, Bruce Vance, our senior financial director, will present our fiscal performance and long-term capital projections." I opened my financial dossier, acutely conscious of my smartphone recording application operating quietly under my notepad. "Thank you, Harlan. Mr. Montgomery, I have prepared a comprehensive audit of our current burn rate, working capital reserves, and a restructured fiscal framework designed to optimize our margins over the next 6 quarters. I had barely completed my third slide, detailing operational cost redundancies, when Spencer Bradley leaned forward across the table. "Forgive the interruption, Bruce," Spencer injected smoothly, addressing the video camera, "but Bruce's expenditure forecasts are somewhat conservative compared to our aggressive sales projections. We should focus our attention on our top-line growth potential rather than defensive budgeting." I offered a brief, polite nod and resumed my presentation, navigating directly to our debt service metrics. Less than 2 minutes later, Julian Croft cut in over my voice. "If I may interject, Bruce, we need to address our cloud server architecture investments before we discuss operating margins. Those financial figures do not reflect our technical scaling requirements." Once again, I acknowledged his comment calmly and attempted to guide the room back to our core balance sheet. I was approaching the central thesis of my presentation, the precise financial recalibration required to make our $80 million funding request viable, when Grant Mercer, our product director, cleared his throat to launch a third interruption. I could briefly add a perspective regarding customer acquisition metrics that might modify these financial figures. Before Grant could complete his sentence, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the conference room speakers. Winston Montgomery leaned forward on his screen, placing his pen down with deliberate emphasis. "I notice a very distinct pattern developing in this room," Winston said, his voice cold and steady. The entire conference room went instantly silent. Spencer Bradley froze mid-gesture. Harlan Thorne stopped fiddling with his tie. "Your senior financial director has been interrupted 3 consecutive times in under 10 minutes," Winston continued, his eyes piercing through the screen as he looked at each executive in turn. "I have been keeping precise count. It reminds me remarkably of our previous preliminary briefings. And frankly, this exact dynamic is precisely why my investment committee at Montgomery Capital has been reconsidering our position regarding Apex Vantage Systems." A suffocating silence enveloped the boardroom. Harlan Thorne turned visibly pale, his hands trembling slightly against his notepad. When executive leadership teams systematically silence their most qualified analytical minds, Winston asserted calmly, They inevitably blind themselves to catastrophic operational risks. I specifically requested Mr. Vance's personal involvement in these financial discussions after tracking his career for years. I am intimately familiar with how he engineered the extraordinary financial turnaround at Tech Vent last year, delivering triple-digit returns to their equity partners. That is precisely why I was deeply troubled during our past two conference calls, when Mr. Vance barely spoke 3 words while others rambled on. My pulse thudded steadily in my chest as I realized the profound shift occurring in that room. Winston was not merely making a casual observation. He was executing a deliberate corporate intervention. I would like to hear Mr. Vance's complete, unedited financial strategy without a single further interruption, Winston commanded, his tone leaving zero room for debate. And once he concludes, I intend to understand precisely why this culture of executive silencing has been tolerated inside Apex Vantage Systems. Harlan Thorne stammered hastily, his voice tight with panic. Of course, Winston. Absolutely. Please proceed without interruption, Bruce. For the next 25 minutes, I delivered my complete, unedited financial master plan for Apex Vantage Systems. Free from disruptive noise, I systematically laid bare our operational inefficiencies, exposed our inflated customer acquisition costs, and presented a precise capital reallocation framework. I demonstrated conclusively how reallocating 23% of our bloated marketing expenditure toward automated client onboarding would reduce operational overhead while accelerating high-margin subscription growth. I proved that by enforcing strict fiscal discipline, Apex Vantage Systems could achieve sustained profitability within 18 months while tripling our valuation metrics. When I concluded my final slide, Winston Montgomery nodded slowly in total approval. That is precisely the level of strategic brilliance and financial rigor I expected from Bruce Vance, Winston declared. Now, Harlan, I want you to explain to me why this is the very first time my investment committee is hearing this holistic financial strategy. Mr. Vance has been serving as your senior financial director for 6 months. Harlan struggled to articulate a coherent defense, his face flushed with embarrassment. We have been integrating elements of Bruce's recommendations progressively, Harlan stuttered. There are naturally multiple executive perspectives that must be balanced in an enterprise of our scale. And clearly, some executive perspectives have been granted unearned dominance while your most critical financial strategist was silenced. Winston interrupted sharply. Let me make Montgomery Capital's position unmistakably clear to everyone in that room. Apex Vantage Systems possesses outstanding proprietary technology, but your executive management structure suffers from severe governance deficiencies. The tension inside that conference room was suffocating. Every director sat frozen, waiting for Winston's verdict. I am prepared to authorize the full $80 million Series B investment package, Winston announced, but only under 3 non-negotiable corporate governance conditions. First, Bruce Vance is immediately elevated to Chief Strategy Officer, reporting directly to Montgomery Capital's investment board rather than filtering his decisions through your internal hierarchy. Second, your executive leadership team will undergo mandatory corporate governance and communication performance audits under Section 141 of the Delaware General Corporation Law to enforce strict fiduciary compliance. Third, Mr. Vance's financial restructuring framework will be implemented in its entirety, exactly as presented today, without piecemeal modifications. Harlan Thorne nodded furiously, overwhelming relief washing across his features at the salvation of his enterprise. We accept those conditions without reservation, Winston. We will execute the documentation immediately. I am not finished, Winston added coldly. In addition to his role as Chief Strategy Officer, I am appointing Bruce Vance to Montgomery Capital's Independent Advisory Board. We require his analytical oversight across our broader enterprise portfolio. This advisory board appointment carries its own executive compensation package and equity grants, completely independent of his standing at Apex Vantage Systems. I sat perfectly still, processing the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. This was far beyond standard professional validation. It was a total restructuring of executive authority. I was granted direct access to the ultimate capital decision-maker, complete independence from internal political maneuvering, and a formidable compensation structure that rendered me unassailable. Does this arrangement meet your standards, Bruce? Winston asked, his expression softening into genuine professional respect. Meeting his gaze directly, I replied, "Yes, Mr. Montgomery. I have absolute confidence in the commercial power of our technology, and I am fully committed to executing this financial strategy to ensure complete profitability." "Outstanding," Winston concluded. "My legal counsel will deliver the binding agreements by 4 o'clock today. I expect them executed before close of business tomorrow." "Good day, gentlemen." The video display clicked off, leaving the boardroom in total stunned silence. Harlan Thorne sat slouched in his leather chair, his confidence entirely drained. Spencer Bradley and Julian Croft stared blankly at their polished table settings, unable to make eye contact with anyone. My smartphone recording application continued to run silently beneath my notepad, capturing every heavy breath and uncomfortable rustle of paper in the aftermath. I calmly gathered my financial documents, slid my smartphone into my breast pocket, and stood up. "Congratulations on your promotion, Bruce," Harlan finally offered, his voice strained and hollow. "We will need to schedule time to align on responsibilities." I offered a polite, measured nod. "Thank you, Harlan. We will discuss the operational roadmap tomorrow morning." As I walked out of the conference room and down the quiet corridor toward my executive office, I heard hushed, panicked exchanges erupt behind me. Back inside my private office, I closed the double doors and took a deep, steadying breath. My smartphone vibrated with an incoming email notification from Winston Montgomery's executive assistant, confirming a private breakfast briefing scheduled for 8 o'clock the following morning at the city's premier executive club. 30 minutes later, a soft knock sounded at my office door. Harlan Thorne walked in, his customary bravado entirely replaced by cautious deference. "May I sit down, Bruce?" he asked softly. I gestured toward the leather armchair across from my desk. "Of course, Harlan." He sat down, nervously adjusting his watch band. "I want to offer my personal apology for any miscommunications or operational friction that occurred during your initial months here," Harlan began, choosing his words with meticulous care. "We value your intellect immensely, and I regret that our meeting structure did not afford you the floor you deserved." "Thank you, Harlan," I replied, keeping my posture composed and my tone strictly neutral. "I appreciate the gesture." Harlan leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Tell me honestly, Bruce, was this intervention something you arranged directly with Winston prior to the call?" I met his gaze with unyielding clarity. "No, Harlan. I was just as surprised by Winston's direct intervention as you were." He nodded slowly, processing my response, before his gaze drifted down toward my shirt pocket. "And the recording device operating on your phone during the conference call?" My heartbeat remained completely steady. Single-party consent audio recording is entirely legal under federal law and state statutes in our jurisdiction, Harlan. I have spent 6 months documenting a persistent pattern of executive interruptions that undermined our fiduciary obligations. The recording was generated strictly to preserve objective evidence of corporate governance failures for internal protection. Harlan's eyes widened slightly, a subtle flicker of alarm crossing his face. "I see," he murmured. "And do you intend to submit that recording to Montgomery Capital's audit committee?" "That depends entirely upon the level of operational cooperation I receive." "Moving forward," I answered calmly. "I joined Apex Vantage Systems because I recognized its commercial potential. I remain committed to making this company profitable, but I will not tolerate political sabotage or deliberate obstruction of my strategic mandates." Harlan stood up, extending his hand with newfound seriousness. "You will have your revised executive contract on your desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And Bruce, I truly am sorry." That evening, I met my longtime friend and legal counsel, Brian Porter, at a quiet downtown steakhouse. Brian, a veteran corporate litigation attorney who had represented Fortune 500 executives in complex governance disputes, listened intently as I recounted the day's events over a glass of vintage bourbon. "You executed that brilliantly, Bruce," Brian remarked, setting his glass down. "Documenting their behavior while maintaining total legal compliance under federal single-party consent statutes gave you ultimate leverage. But remember, Spencer and Julian are going to feel humiliated. They will look for any opportunity to undermine your operational implementation. I am well aware, I replied. But with Winston Montgomery backing my authority and holding direct oversight through Montgomery Capital, political games will carry immediate termination consequences for them. The following Monday morning, Harlan Thorne convened an all-hands executive assembly to formally announce the $80 million Series B funding package and my promotion to Chief Strategy Officer. The restructuring was presented publicly as a planned organizational evolution. While the general staff reacted with genuine enthusiasm, Spencer Bradley and Julian Croft maintained tight, artificial smiles throughout the presentation. Immediately following the announcement, I convened individual departmental alignment sessions. I began with marketing Spencer Bradley's domain. I walked into the marketing conference room to find Spencer seated with his senior directors, his posture defensive and guarded. "Thank you for your time, gentlemen," I began, distributing newly printed operational guidelines. "We are here to align marketing expenditures with our revised fiscal framework." Spencer cleared his throat loudly. "Before we begin, Bruce, I must point out that reducing our branding budgets by 23% risks damaging our market visibility." I looked at Spencer calmly, opening a detailed performance matrix. "I appreciate your concern, Spencer. Let us examine the empirical data. Over the past 4 quarters, your department spent $400,000 on broad digital campaigns that generated a conversion rate of less than 1.2%. Meanwhile, our targeted industrial logistics webinars generated a 12% conversion rate at 1/5 the cost. We are not eliminating your budget. We are reallocating capital toward proven, high ROI acquisition channels." For the next hour, I did not argue. I presented undeniable data. When Spencer attempted to dismiss my metrics as overly theoretical, I asked precise quantitative questions that required hard figures rather than rhetorical posturing. By the conclusion of the session, Spencer's own department directors were actively engaging with my model and proposing constructive implementation ideas. As the team filed out, Spencer remained seated. "This feels like personal retaliation, Bruce," he said quietly once the room cleared. I looked him straight in the eye. "It is not personal, Spencer. It is arithmetic. This company was 3 weeks away from payroll insolvency because executive decisions were being driven by vanity rather than fiscal reality. I need your marketing expertise fully aligned with this strategy. Are you prepared to execute this plan professionally?" Spencer studied me for a long moment before offering a single, firm nod. "I will align with the strategy." Over the subsequent 6 months, a profound transformation took place across Apex Vantage systems. Similar operational alignment sessions were conducted with Julian Croft in engineering. When Julian initially protested my reallocation of cloud infrastructure funds, I demonstrated through server audit logs that 43% of our computing capacity was being consumed by legacy features that less than 7% of our enterprise clients ever utilized. Faced with unassailable technical data, Julian conceded and redirected his engineering teams toward optimizing core analytics performance. The empirical results of our fiscal restructuring emerged with remarkable velocity. By the conclusion of the first full quarter under the new strategic framework, customer retention metrics had improved by 16%. Customer acquisition costs had plummeted by 22%, and our operational runway had expanded significantly. Harlan Thorne, recognizing that my financial framework had saved his company and elevated his standing with investors, evolved into an earnest, dependable ally. During our weekly executive check-ins, Harlan actively solicited my analysis and championed my directives across all departments. 6 months after that recorded boardroom meeting, Apex Vantage Systems was no longer merely surviving. It was dominating its market sector. Enterprise contract values had doubled, operational friction had vanished, and our corporate culture had undergone a total cultural overhaul. Executive briefing protocols now strictly enforced designated, uninterrupted speaking blocks for all presenters, ensuring that analytical insights were evaluated on merit rather than vocal volume. Spencer Bradley became one of the most effective champions of our targeted marketing framework. while Julian Croft delivered platform updates that set industry benchmarks for efficiency. As for my dual appointments, my position on Montgomery Capital's independent advisory board opened unprecedented professional horizons. I was invited to evaluate restructuring strategies for major portfolio companies across North America, consulted by institutional investment syndicates, and invited to deliver keynote lectures on corporate governance and financial strategy. The smartphone audio recording that had initiated this transformation remained securely encrypted on my offline storage drive, untouched and unneeded. Its mere existence had served its purpose without ever requiring public disclosure. The ultimate validation of our journey arrived during our annual shareholder meeting, exactly 12 months after that pivotal recorded conference call. I stood before an audience of major institutional investors, board members, and industry analysts in the grand auditorium of Montgomery Capital's headquarters. Under Bruce Vance's strategic leadership as Chief Strategy Officer, Harlan Thorne announced proudly from the podium, Apex Vantage Systems has achieved a 67% increase in annual recurring revenue while simultaneously reducing operational overhead by 31%. Our enterprise client base has expanded by 43%, backed by industry-leading retention metrics. Winston Montgomery then took the stage, adjusting his microphone as he addressed the assembly. When Montgomery Capital authorized $80 million in Series B funding for Apex Vantage Systems 1 year ago, we were investing in commercial potential. Today, that potential has been fully realized through flawless strategic vision, quantitative rigor, and executive accountability. He turned toward me with a smile of deep professional admiration. Bruce Vance has demonstrated to the entire corporate world what happens when enterprises empower their finest strategic minds rather than allowing them to be silenced by boardroom noise. Following the shareholder assembly, Winston pulled me aside into a private executive suite overlooking the city skyline. I have been monitoring your advisory work across our portfolio enterprises. Over the past year, Bruce, Winston began, offering me a glass of sparkling water. Your quantitative models and structural diagnostics have saved 3 of our struggling tech buyouts. I appreciate the trust you placed in me, Winston, I replied. We are launching a new $200 million corporate turnaround fund, Winston revealed, his gray eyes shining with strategic intent. The fund will specialize exclusively in acquiring distressed, highly technical enterprises that suffer from flawed executive leadership and inefficient capital allocation. The exact corporate profile you excel at rectifying. I want you to join Montgomery Capital as a senior managing partner. The proposal was a monumental career milestone, an equity partnership in a premier venture capital firm with full investment committee authority, substantial profit carry, and global strategic influence. It would mean gradually transitioning out of my daily executive role at Apex Vantage Systems over the coming year. I would be honored to accept, Winston, I stated firmly, after reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 12 months. Over the next several weeks, I structured a seamless 12-month executive transition plan for Apex Vantage Systems, grooming a highly qualified deputy financial officer to assume my internal responsibilities. When I formally announced my eventual transition to senior managing partner at Montgomery Capital, the reaction from our executive team reflected how profoundly our corporate culture had evolved. Harlan Thorne expressed profound gratitude for saving his enterprise. Spencer Bradley thanked me for teaching him data-driven marketing discipline. And Julian Croft noted that our structural overhaul had positioned the engineering department for long-term excellence. On my final evening as Chief Strategy Officer, inside my office at Apex Vantage Systems, I packed my personal belongings into a leather briefcase. I retrieved the notebook where I had drawn those 17 tally marks 1 year earlier, placing it atop my desk drawer as a permanent emblem of where this journey had begun. I opened my laptop, accessed the encrypted audio file of that recorded conference call, and permanently deleted the file from all storage drives. The evidence was no longer necessary. The empirical results spoke for themselves with absolute clarity. In the years since making that transition, Our corporate turnaround fund at Montgomery Capitals has successfully restructured 27 enterprise technology firms, consistently delivering industry-leading returns to our institutional investors. One of my primary evaluation metrics when auditing potential acquisition targets is observing their internal meeting dynamics, identifying who speaks with substance and who attempts to dominate through volume. It is proven to be one of the most reliable indicators of an enterprise's true operational health. True executive authority is never established by shouting over others or demanding compliance through volume. It is built through unassailable analytical clarity, moral courage, and creating institutional environments where every qualified voice is heard completely. If you currently find yourself interrupted, overlooked, or silenced in your professional career, remember that your expertise possesses immense value. Document your facts meticulously, ground your positions in unassailable evidence, and stand firm until your results demand to be heard.